now being
Working Slack link. I'll punch to soy on that.
It's not on Meetup. That's what doesn't work.
No, I'll
Yeah.
try to post it in this Slack here channel.
So go ahead. Okay. Well, so this is the Catalyst platform, as we're calling it. For those that don't know me, I am Todd, and I've been coming to the Cloud Native and Kubernetes and Go and stuff meetups for Utah Forge for about 6 years. When I first started getting into Kubernetes, I worked at a company called Workfront that has since been bought by Adobe. This has been the culmination of our journey. Catalyst Squad, as our company is called, was started because we kept going from company to company. In the 6 years that I've worked on Kubernetes stuff, I have worked at or with about 8 different companies where this has been applied. So these are concepts and principles. They're not necessarily tools that you have to use or anything, but they are packaged in something that makes sense to us. Catalyst Squad just happens to have done this at so many companies, and we kept dragging each other from place to place. We just started our own company to just keep us all together. We work very fast. We tend to change orgs drastically, making them much more modern, cloud native, et cetera. If you ever worked at someone who was resistant to change and had like a whole DBA team and like was really very traditional ops oriented, we get rid of that very, very efficiently and effectively. And we'll talk about that a little bit here. So these are some of our principles here. So we focus on dev, culture, and workflow. I realize that you guys are not exactly our audience of buyers for our consultancy, but that is what we do. And this is why this is relevant to us. We have a lot of open source, as I will show you in a moment. We believe that the things that a lot of engineering folks will say is hard is no longer hard because it is no longer 1995. And we have lots of nice tooling and easy use APIs or cloud offerings or whatever else. So without further ado, Ops is dead. And our creed is like, we could talk about the ideal engineering outcome, but we're really actually focusing on getting things done and actual value sustained over the long term. Not about like, get that feature shipped. It's about how do I make my life easier for doing this for the next 3 years? So that approach is going to permeate throughout this. We'll talk about those as well, but without further ado, let's talk about history. So back when we still had the Cloud Native meetup that was separate from the Kubernetes meetup, I joined when I was getting into Kubernetes. It was the winning orchestration framework. Did some Docker Swarm at Workfront, but whatever. Nobody liked it. Nobody could figure out how to make it reliable, and we just skipped right over it. But at the time when I started coming to these meetups, I don't know if anybody remembers, Clint was still installing things in production mid-meetup while people were presenting stuff, trying stuff out. We kind of took that as sort of like, oh, this is the possibility here. This is what we could do with this kind of technology and this approach, and how do we set it up so that we could do that? And this is our story. We solve crimes. So this is what we started with was COPS. And since then, we've moved to the main 3 offerings, obviously. I think everybody has at least looked at them, if not had a company directly using them. I have worked at so many companies that are in different clouds that's how it was. I was on LKE's beta, so I was invite from the 2018 UConn. They had a booth there. They invited a whole bunch of people if they had any sort of like Kubernetes experience, and so I evaluated them. They're okay for like small operation stuff, a bit expensive, but whatever. We're trying to do something in Oracle Cloud that hasn't been getting my priority right now, but it is on my radar, specifically in the Catalyst Squad, where Oracle Cloud is really cheap, like ridiculously cheap for now. And as you'll see as we go through this platform, that's fine. Like if it changed prices 6 months from now, that wouldn't actually matter. It would be really easy to like pivot or anything because of our approach. So we're really focused on the cloud native world. What that means to me, hopefully the rest of anyone else with the definition of it, is we want the thing to not know what it doesn't need to know. We don't care what environment we're running in. We don't care that we're running in Linux. We don't care that like there's only one of us. There could be N of us tomorrow. It's fine. And we don't need to have names, cattle, not pets. These are all principles, but near and dear to our heart is the core tenet of everything communicating to anything else is a URL and a protocol, otherwise known as an API contract. Doesn't matter. Everything needs to follow that. I don't care if it's Postgres or not Postgres. As long as it follows the Postgres protocol and has all the features that I need to use, that fulfills my contract, I can talk to it. That could be Cockroach, that could be RDS, it doesn't matter. It's a URL. All I need is that injected into a config file or environment variables. So that is our approach after all these years, and something we've kind of codified into our design. And this is what it was based on. 2 years ago, we had a conversation in the Forge Slack, and then I compiled that whole conversation into essentially this and posted it on LinkedIn. It got some attention, and people seemed to enjoy it, and we kind of ran with it anyway because we really wanted essentially a Kubernetes cluster that we could kind of forget about. We don't like spending time managing Kubernetes or any of the things we install in it. So making that as light of touch as possible is perfect. But we also want to get dev stuff done, and that means that we need to have observability tooling and automation, things like that. So you can't read it, and that's fine. We'll go over all the things, but it's basically logs, metrics, error monitoring, tracing, external DNS, the cluster autoscaler, the things that you kind of, if you're in a Kubernetes cluster, you already think, oh, those are the things that you use in Kubernetes. They don't come out of the box with Kubernetes. Like, people take them for granted, especially now, as many of us who were early adopters are well aware. So yeah, so we have external DNS and we have external TLS stuff through Certificate Manager and Let's Encrypt. You can use like your own provider like DigiCert or whatever if you want. And whatever external DNS and Certificate Manager will work with. I never want to see an SSL error ever. And this basically ensures that I don't. And we do have like monitoring and alerts for, is there a TLS problem on any of our stuff? So that is also checked, but I've never had a warning with it because it's just good. So there we go. Let's talk about what is guiding our approach in the dev side, because we're devs, not ops or anything else. Some of this is, if you saw my lightning talk at Go West, this slide is straight up copied from that with some alterations. But the number one is still Git is the workflow. And that is really, really important to me and the rest of us. We do not want to log into a server. We do not want to configure something in a GUI. We do not want to log into a web page. We do not want to do anything other than work with code and commit through Git. The worst that we do in this Git is the workflow is the PR workflow, where you kind of have to have a conversation, and GitHub is good at that. We've done it with GitLab, it's fine. GitHub is superior with GitHub Actions now, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But yeah, Git is the workflow. I think I actually cover that specifically. This is literally the commands that we run on a daily basis in all of our repos, because we are CI/CD and GitOps through and through. Everything that we do is GitOps. You can use all of our actions that are open source that enable all this as well. Like, we don't care, they're versioned. We're going to try to keep them sane because we want to use them and like our clients use them, etc. So we are maintaining those. They may not have the features you want, but that's fine. You could discuss a PR, that's fine. But this is very good for everything that we do, whether it's infrastructure or actual services or libraries or Helm charts or any of the things. So that's the workflow we adopt. Some other things that are important. This may not be controversial in this group, but a lot of DevOps people are like, wait, but I got to have my logs. It's like, you don't need logs. You do not need logs. People do not understand. And I don't actually have a good analogy for why you don't need logs, but everybody who goes on the metrics journey, there's a moment where it clicks and it's like, oh, metrics are so much better than logs in every way possible. So that's a tenet of ours. Hopefully everybody else is adopting that or moving towards that at a rapid pace. We're not special is also really important, because I really hate the like, oh, we got to be like Google, or oh, we're not Google. Like, if you evaluate it like an engineer, I don't care what some other company did unless they're writing about it, talking about the pros and cons. If they don't talk about the pros and cons, you're going to have to try it out and evaluate. Like, you're not special, but that's also not a reason to not try it out. Just follow good practices and figure out what like isn't your special snowflake workflow. So all of our approach is built on that. Like, we're not building a bespoke special Kubernetes cluster. We're building a Kubernetes cluster with all the off-the-shelf things that you would probably want anyway. And if it's not the ones you want, you could probably swap it out. Like, it's pretty easy. We'll get there. Separation of concerns, again, very cloud native thinking. The database is a service. It runs over here. It has a port, it has a protocol, API contract, it has an owner. Everything else is the exact same, but it's just over there. And we don't get religious about like microservices or monoliths or whatever. Like, we have opinions about not following those religions, but we don't have opinions about like, this is the right way because I read it in a blog. It's, if we do it one way versus another way, what are the pros and cons? And we have discussions or arguments sometimes. And that's been over years, and we've arrived at where we're at because of that. Semver. I don't care what versioning system you want, we use Semver. If you think yours is superior, that's fine. Just don't tell me, and we won't have an argument. Semver is everywhere. We use conventional commits everywhere because it just ensures so much for us out of the box that we don't have to spend any mental energy on. And I'm all about being lazy and focusing on other things. So Semver everywhere. We believe that everything should be ephemeral, including your cluster. So all of our stuff is kind of geared towards the option of, what if I just deleted AWS? All of it. How bad would that be? You know, sometimes like we have backups in the same account, so that's no bueno for that scenario. But like at the same time, we can also have completely different Valero backups in a different cloud or whatever. So like there's lots of options and composability there, and none of the other pieces care. So it's not like, oh, if the Valero backup's not working, your Postgres instance won't work. But okay, fine. That doesn't happen here because we just build in the idea of delete as much as possible. You should be able to like fearlessly delete everything up to a point, unless it's state. Like, don't delete PVCs, obviously. And we use Grafana for alerts. That is more controversial. I don't like Alert Manager. Not only is it hard to configure, but it is also the same level of hard to configure as Grafana, except Grafana can do more sources. So Grafana can actually correlate between different sources of metrics and or whatnot that we have. And we really enjoy being able to correlate, like, look, yeah, the error rate's up, but that's because some other thing is going haywire that we're not getting metrics on. It's just a status page or whatever. We can correlate those and build those into a single dashboard. We can build alerts off of those correlations, that sort of thing. The only exception to that is we have to monitor Grafana with not Grafana. Who watches the Watchman? Everybody's aware of that problem. And we just use a CloudWatch check for that. And we do that in every cluster we produce. So that was the wrong one. Sorry, the arrows are tiny on my phone. So this is the layout of a typical deployment that we're going to go for, whether it's a single team or we've done this for the entire company in many places, because most people don't need the scale. But this gives you everything you need, and it is tiny. It's surprisingly just small. The org or core account is where you have like your SSO configuration or your Terraform states or Pulumi states or whatever in a bucket there. And the only things that are in there are things for configuring the rest of the things. And the only reason they're in separate accounts is because blast radius is important. So if somebody were to get into the common account, they can't jump back to the org or core account where all of our SSO configuration is. But at the same time, like they would need a lot of special information to go from the org account to anything else without role assumption in a session that properly has the permissions, etc. So we have all of that managed by Terraform, and the org repo is not actually public and open source because it's all very specific to like your Okta environment at your company. But it's just the normal Terraform modules. It's set up your cloud account with Terraform. Done. Now you have a proper, yes?
These are cloud provider accounts, so Amazon accounts, GCP projects.
Yep. Or subscriptions in Azure.
Okay. And some of them is a hierarchy, but not all of those cloud providers actually have hierarchies.
Yes. Yes, they're just separate. There's why there's no arrows on this.
Okay.
Because
Theoretical.
it's all just like separation of blast radius. It's security conscious, not like specific implementation. And again, the idea is that there's separation of concerns. The Kubernetes cluster does not care at all what account it's in. It gets the configuration that it needs to do its job. It doesn't know where it is. It doesn't know what its name is, because that would be a pet at that point. So there are names for it, like DNS names for different clusters, but those are for me, right? So anyway, the common account is, we'll get to that in a second, but it is very important to have something like this in most organizations. This may not be something I would want to use for like my personal website or something, but the non-prod account is where anything that is not prod, and the prod account is where anything that is prod all goes. The prod and non-prod definition is only about customer data. That's it. That's the only distinction, because I should be running the same versions in both places, and they should not know or care about whether I'm in a dev environment. That's the opposite of good. It is the opposite of doing something the right way. If it knows that it is a dev environment, now you have a bifurcation and you're not testing prod in your non-prod account. You're not testing the same code paths, because building the awareness means that you have if statements or something in there that does something different. Don't do that. Point it to a different URL that isn't customer data, and that's fine. But I also need libraries like my NPM registry or Python packages or Docker images or whatever in some central place, because both prod and non-prod need to run the same code, which means they need to get the same artifacts. I can either push those, or I can store them there and have them pulled, but non-prod and prod should never be talking to each other. They should never be pointed at each other in any regard. So that's been our approach, is just to have anything we want in a common account. That's also where all the metrics and logs and everything gets shipped, so that if somebody gets into prod or non-prod and does something dastardly, I have all of the observability data in not that account, so I can look back and forensically decide what happened. I can take action and just destroy the whole account if I need to, but then I don't lose that forensic ability. That debug ability, like, is usually, I don't know if any of you have experience from like the 90s or early 2000s, but like in that war room, like, oh, we don't want to restart the process because then we won't know what's going on in this current state and this is super valuable. We got to troubleshoot. Like, no, just get things back up and look at the forensic data afterwards. So that's what the common account is for. Any questions on that so far?
I was wondering what the separation between the org and core account and common accounts, but I get all the three other triangle points, but I don't get the common, like why that's separate from org.
Because I don't want things in common for like every developer in the company to use. Like, I don't want the NPM registry in there at the same place that all of the Terraform state, including any secrets or whatever that are in there, all the secrets manager state, if you're in AWS, like that's in our org or core account. The S3 buckets for Terraform state, the SSO configuration, if you're in AWS, that has to live in your org account. It's not part of your, you can't just have it in any account and they all just propagate. You have to have a hierarchy in AWS.
Like level of trust, right? They're kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
One is, depending on how much you trust it, you put it in one place or the other.
Yeah, and part of this, the vernacular is kind of trying to be as flexible as possible, but like different clouds are entirely different. So like GCP doesn't have an org account, but they do have an org. And there are things that are org-wide in there. And then there are things that are project specific, and some of them propagate and some of them don't. And we basically just decided that whole layer should just live on its own, be separate from our infrastructure, if that makes sense.
Why is it prod 1/2?
Oh, prod 1/2 is not 1/2. It's if you are in a place where you want to have like redundancy, like Workfront was obsessed with like having 12 environments for things, and it didn't make any sense, but they would have a prod 1 and a prod 2 and a prod 1 DR and a prod 2 DR. And this is a an actual need in some instances. If you need more than one prod account so that you can like keep running if like your entire cloud goes down or something, that enables it to be that. You can have just separate path radiuses that are also prod and they can share and link data however it makes sense for your application or service set or whatever. So that just is, you can have multiple of those. There's no reason to have multiple non-prod accounts. Like that is antithetical to what it is. It's dev and playgrounds and sandboxes and things. It's
No concept of like a beta environment.
what is a beta?
I'm anti-beta account. I'm just.
So that vernacular beta stage, QA, all of these things are like company specific. And if you're a company of any reasonable size, like say more than like 50, different groups will have different definitions. And I hate that conversation. It's like, does it touch customer data or not? If it doesn't touch customer data, run 12 Kubernetes accounts in the non-prod account. I don't care. Like you can have multiple clusters. There's nothing stopping you. We had this problem at Berkadia actually. There was a bunch of people that really wanted a staged environment. And I went to every single group and I asked, what does staged environment mean to you? And they gave me a list of requirements. And like every single list, there wasn't even overlap. There were like 7 different definitions and I just had them all and I presented it to our team and like, this is what people want. No, we're not doing that. We will give them the tools that if they want to have 7 different versions, they can deploy into either the non-prod or the prod account. And if they want 7 different environments and all of them need to touch customer data, great, awesome. Well, we want you to copy it. No, that's your job. If you want to have the copy data like snapshot or whatever, you do it. It's your application. I don't even know what your data looks like. Why am I going to copy that? That's stupid. So anyway, that argument went really well, as you can imagine. And we didn't make a stage environment. We just gave them the tools to like, look, you have DNS automation. Go for it. So, all right, we're good on that. Retry. We're now at a point where I will show you some code. And then obviously any questions that come up, or if you want to ask me like online later, like if you're watching the recording, I can be found pretty easily. It's weird, I know. So this is Catalyst Squad's org on GitHub. We have a whole bunch of actions for GitHub actions. Some of those are like composite actions that join other actions into like a script. Some of them are base actions. We use them extensively. GitHub Actions does so much work for us. We don't have any Git commit hooks or anything like that. They're unreliable. They're awful. Don't use them. If you love them, I'm sorry. Maybe we can fix you. So that is our org. And in that, we have a documentation. It's evolving. We're using the Divio documentation framework with like explanation and tutorial and stuff. The only thing in there right now is explanation. This was one of the ones that I originally wrote, and I think it's actually like from summer, it's June 7th. But yeah, so this is all the things that we're using. You can see external DNS, Cert Manager, Sentry. If you prefer Jaeger or something, that's fine. You just need to set it up. But we're using, this is super important. We're using the app of apps pattern with Argo. This is a recent change. We did this 2 years ago, where we, instead of having CI/CD push directly to an environment, we instead push Helm charts to a registry, and Argo pulls the updates from a values file and the Helm chart, and it can do the update accordingly. So we can change only what we need to change, and it will only update what it needs to update, rather than trying to think of everything as like some holistic deployment or something. But you also get all the advantages of having a holistic deployment that you can deploy everything together. We do this a lot. Our workflow uses Scaffold to use the same Helm charts we use in production, and we use those in dev, like on our laptops or wherever else we want. But the app of apps pattern, is everybody familiar with Argo? Argo CD? Okay, good. So Argo CD polling has an application, but that application can be a Helm chart that has a whole bunch of applications in it. And so it's like a layered thing. You can version everything together. Does anybody ever have the problem where like product wants to know, but what's the version of the app, even though you've got 12 services? That solves that. So we can just point to that and say, this is the version of things. And anybody can see that in Git, anybody can see that in Argo, we can pull it on an API, like all these things are available to us. But it also means that we can update piecemeal and very specific and have that flow from version to version to version, or we can just update a values file and not change the actual Helm chart at all. So we can override values and say like, actually we need 3 of these instead of 2 now because whatever reason. So this is just kind of an explanation. I mostly wrote this for some clients that were having trouble kind of getting their head around. They weren't really Kubernetes people, let alone Argo people. So getting their head around like Argo applications and things like that. A visual and an explanation that they could refer to constantly and ask questions about was very helpful. So that's this. Pardon me. So let's see. We also have our charts repo. This is our Helm Registry. It's literally a Git repo that nobody touches. Like the Automation Catalyst Squad is a user that we created and added to our org for our CI/CD to use because GitHub Actions actually have one killer flaw, and that is that bots can't do jack squat. And so we don't have a bot. We have an actual user that has a GitHub pat, and we just put it in our secrets and use that as the authentication to all the things. Otherwise, GitHub Actions is also a here as well, but it's not a real user. And there's so many things that it can't do. And GitHub Actions will just silently not tell you about it. So that's our issue there. Let's see. If you're curious about how any of this works, this is an important pattern in our world. We also have like client specific. They have a GitHub org as well, and all of their specific charts go in theirs, not ours. This is all of our public open source ones. And then we have the actual platform. So the actual platform is just a Terraform module that allows you to spit out AWS resources. Again, we do work in other clouds, but our current client is in AWS, and that's where all of our focus is getting. It's really easy because you just need a Cube API up, and then you can install the rest of the things in there just fine. It's working in that layers that we'll talk about in a sec. But yeah, so this is all Ben's work, by the way, who is sitting in the middle here. Ben has been the key driver of a lot of this. I don't want to like pretend like I know everything, but praise be unto Ben. He's very, very good at this. Anybody using Vim can look to him as a mentor and inspiration because he's very good at Vim and does everything in Vim. But so he did this and has been trying to up his documentation game. Hopefully it's easy to read and easy to follow, but it just is all the AWS resources you need to get a Kubernetes cluster up and running. And it will tie all of your IAM stuff to that Kubernetes cluster via the AWS authenticator that comes with a EKS. So it will also set up all the things in AWS for working with other things like the Valero backups can cross accounts and stuff. Very useful, very straightforward. Start from scratch. You don't need to bring your own VPC. Again, cloud native. You don't need a VPN. None of these accounts have arrows to them. You don't need like strong network policies. If you do, that's fine. You can also afford to hire us to do that for you or something. This is not that crowd, right? Yes.
Before you go on, how do you say you need a Kubernetes API? I always struggle on, is the Kubernetes API enough, or does this also install Argo and point it to the right? Like, how do you kickstart Argo?
Argo is on this one.
Okay, so Argo's in here.
This one.
Oh, it's different Terraform module.
Ah.
But it's still Terraform.
It is still Terraform.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it. No, we have to use kubectl via Terraform.
Okay. Right. You're not using Helm charts.
It does install a Helm chart, I believe, of Argo. It's not using the Argo CD CLI. We hate the CLIs because they build a dependency on somebody's laptop, and we want to avoid that like the plague. So everything we do will be done in CI/CD. Everything we also do in CI/CD is usually like a bash script or an NPM module away from running on your laptop. So it's not like we're dependent entirely on GitHub. If GitHub blew up today, all the repos are on 2 of my laptops. And we would take the time, but we could spend all the time building the runners and whatnot as well. As a matter of fact, we actually have a runner image. It's on Quay, it's open source. It's the Catalyst runner image repo. It's just a Docker image that is actually compatible with the GitHub Actions runner that you can run in Kubernetes. And we developed that. It was originally for GitLab, and then we spent a lot of time for a client trying to figure out how to run things in their environment, because they did have all the like weird enterprise VPN nonsense. So they needed to run from inside their cloud environment first, rather than attached to it from somebody in GitHub Actions land. So that's available in there, and we will maintain it if you do a PR like this needs to be updated or added or whatever. Happy to take it. But yeah, so that has all those commands as well. But then we have the actual cluster bootstrap where we install all of the services, and that is also Terraform. But it's just the Argo CD and then the platform services chart, which is an app of apps that will install all of the things in the minimum viable Kubernetes cluster. So at the end of those 3 layers, the first layer being whatever cloud you're in, the second layer being whatever Kubernetes cluster environment you're in, and the third layer being whatever Catalyst group of services you want deployed in that Kubernetes environment. So the cluster bootstrap, the Catalyst platform itself in the Kubernetes cluster has no idea that it's in this cloud. It doesn't care. At that point, you were working against a Kubernetes API with services that are saying, you don't need to know if you're in AWS land or anything else. That is somebody else's concern. And that means that like platform services team could be a separate team, and they would just own the Kubernetes cluster and or infra layer, and they may not actually own Argo. You know, like that could be 2 separate teams or three objects in one team. It doesn't matter. But we spend no time maintaining this. We only add and augment to it when like we hit a bug or we need to change a configuration or we're adding like a new chart to things. It's not like we spend a lot of time like, oh, we gotta update this every 3rd day. You know, our laziness is very, very strong. Like I cannot stress this enough. I started a company that is a telco company in 2016. I installed it on a T2 small, and I literally only logged in once every like 9 months. And that was literally to just check, have there been any exceptions in the logs? And it's since been migrated to Kubernetes, and I just don't even look at it. I just don't touch it because I don't want to. And the cloud will automatically update it if you configure it. Like it'll automatically update all of Kubernetes and all the things you're doing in there. And then I'll get an alert if that fails. So I don't need to take action unless I actually need to take action. Very nice.
Why is your Prometheus stack not part of the platform services?
I believe it is.
Oh, it's not.
It's not?
The
Oh, right.
Argo, we are installing Prometheus custom resources in the Argo CD Helm chart. So it needs to exist before Argo does.
Yeah.
Otherwise it will fail to install.
So that's
And then
in
there's also-
this-
Argo had a problem where the Prometheus custom resource definitions were too big for Argo to handle. Because it is doing a client-side apply, which adds an annotation that has the entire spec of the custom resource definition, and it's like Argo can like apply it. And so having Terraform apply it fixed the problem. So those 2 reasons.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, we did handle a lot of chicken and egg scenario problems in this. Yeah. With a Terraform repo that you can then apply some values to and some values YAML files, you could probably get this up and running very quickly. Ben and I are both on the Forge Slack if you ever want to try it for yourself, or you know, sneakily try to do it at your company or something and like then show it off. We're happy to talk and help you walk you through stuff, whatever. Again, the motivation for this is we wanted to stop doing this at every company and instead just apply it. So we actually spent 2 months on Pulumi version of this, and then we spent 2 days on the Terraform version when Pulumi was not working. That worked out really well, actually. We've talked to an open source Pulumi engineer who works for Pulumi, but only on the open source side. And gave him a list of like, okay, so here's what we ran into, here's why we thought there was a problem, here's what our struggles were. And he's like, yep, that's all pretty much exactly what we thought. And here's my approach on 2 of those that I will get to this year, and the rest, hopefully, we have other people on. So props to Pulumi for listening and knowing, but Terraform was much faster for us. Yes.
Is this designed for clusters per service or team, or is it designed for multi-tenant?
It's composable. The layers don't care. So if you can like set up a different DNS zone, like you can give each cluster its own DNS zone and automation that is isolated from everybody else. We did that at Workfront. We did that at Berkadia. We do that at our current client, and they all just have different DNS names, and they don't like, you have to build your application so it doesn't care about what its domain name is, which is surprisingly easy when you start that way. So like the web has never needed that. We have ruined it somehow, but yeah, so it's great. It can do multiple groups. It can do, offices. We originally built that because of Workfront. Every team was supposed to get their own Kubernetes cluster, and it turns out they didn't want to read, so that was a bust. And so we just built a bigger one for each lane and gave people credentials involved and stuff. But
Do you do anything to help manage RBAC clusters and provisioning namespaces then, or is that it's customized to?
so we do that through our gatekeeping mechanism for that is PRs. You can't just do willy-nilly. So you do have RBAC, so we can like limit things via the AWS auth map or whatever else equivalent in other clouds if we have to go there, that we know exists. Like we've done it in GCP before, but so we can do that. Right now it's fairly willy-nilly because we have the PR mechanism for, you're trying to add this application and you're trying to take over this domain name, and no. We also have some linters and checks that will do that as well, saying like, you have 2 equivalent hosts and stuff like, so there's things like that you can do. We're not super sophisticated about it because it's such a small footprint. I mean, there are only 4 engineers in Catalyst Squad right now. We do plan on expanding to about 12 eventually, but like, it's really easy to just reach over. We're usually in a round or on Slack and just say, Ben, you're trying to do something stupid. Can you help me understand? Is it yours or him? A little of both. It goes both ways. I'm definitely stupid in a lot of things, and I will rant in our Slack about all sorts of things, mostly Rust lately, but yeah, so it's really easy to talk to people and just be like, this looks wrong. Am I missing something? Like that has actually happened. I mean, I think this week I said, Ben, I think you're deleting this thing. Why? And he's like, oh, you need to do that through, and like, oh, that makes sense. Okay. But it wasn't obvious in the PR changes because it was like a values YAML file to a chart that was in another repo that I didn't want to look up. So yeah, that usually are where we hit those possibilities that we're not enabling yet because we don't have to. I don't think our client at the moment would ever actually need to ever. I think Workfront, we did, but we did it all manually and we just never, like if we build that intelligence into this eventually, like people will be able to just turn that on. It'll be like a value in the YAML file, true. And all right, now you get strict namespace policies or whatever, So that's all potential. This is easily extensible. Install another thing on the platform or use a different configuration or all of our services actually, like we use Loki for logs because Elastic has lost all faith for me. But Loki is not required. Like Loki is just set Loki enable defaults. By default, they're all false. So you can like, I want to use the elk stack or whatever. Great. You want to install that? Just add a section for that. It's not hard. And you can fork it, like it's all Apache 2. We don't care. If you're going to blame us for bugs, like I'll get spicy with you. I don't mind. But it's available for everyone. It's not just like our way or the highway. It's supposed to be configurable. Any other questions? I will bring up this slide once more, mostly for the recording. People can find me if they need to ask questions, whatever. And yeah, happy hunting. Yes.
You make use of a lot of things that are Kubernetes centric, so like cert manager and stuff like that. Have you either currently or envisioned anything that you would do based on your own controllers or your own mutating webhooks or your own usage of those same features? Or as it stands right now, kind of Terraform stuff in and then Argo and off you go? Is there anything that you're looking at that direction?
We do use some operators of our own. They are client specific at the moment, but if we have a generalized one, we will like compare. But the pattern's available, but it's Kubernetes is our whole world. We only do things that we can run on multiple clouds. There's no reason, like we're not in the deep of SageMaker or something awful like that. And at this point, I don't actually see a point to optimizing for the other direction, because I think if you're at that point, you really need to be asking why you're in the cloud in the first place. But we use S3 buckets because they're equivalent in every cloud. And if you don't want that, that's fine. You can run Wasabi or something. Even on, like all of this is compatible with on-metal, with the exception of the cloud infrastructure stuff. So once you've got a Kubernetes cluster, you can install the Catalyst platform on that, on bare metal, and you still get all the auto scaling and stuff. You don't have to worry about the Alero being weird in this environment versus that environment. You just point it at a different S3 URL or whatever the case may be, whatever your configuration is. So our default out of the box configurations are built for us. If those are extensible so that we can be like same defaults for everyone that don't clobber people that are currently using whatever, great. Like we'll never accept a PR that's like, okay, I really love this project and we're going to enable it by default. No, it's going to be disabled by default and you can enable it in your thing. Like our default is not to clobber anything. Mileage may vary.
How do you guarantee that kind of, I've hard to understanding how you can say that you can put the whole platform on any managed Kubernetes, because they're not equivalent. Even if you say you're just gonna have just like your Prometheus stack on there, the URL you give somebody, the way you would make that Prometheus installation accessible to a person, say, here's where you go to get to Prometheus, that might require a totally different set of resources in every cloud. And especially on metal, like there's no way you can just on bare metal, like make an ingress and somehow expect the ingress is going to give them back a reachable address.
I mean, you can, like even in bare metal, you can have an ingress object, have an ingress controller. You can use whatever controller is your favorite or whatever.
Doesn't mean they all work identically. You are saying like that would be part of the provisioner of the lower level of the infrastructure, and to say like, okay, well, when you're replacing our AWS Terraform module with your bare metal module, and we expect it to, you have some sort of base level expectations of Kubernetes resources standards as the actuals, because they're the ideal. But anybody that's tried to do any real things finds out pretty quick that every cloud is like, sure, you can make a service. Oh, you're in Google. You want a load balance for that. It's this annotation. You're Amazon. You want a load balance for that annotation. Like there's the standards are just like, especially ingress. Ingress is like the least standard of all standards.
Well, so again, everything we're building, it doesn't care about that part.
Okay.
So if you have an ingress controller and it's going to look at ingress objects, great, you can use that for any of your stuff. If you need different annotations on whatever Helm chart, okay, great. But if you're doing something weird that like Argo isn't going to be compatible with because you've got you've got no ingress compatibility whatsoever, like you're using some bespoke thing that you wrote, or it doesn't look at ingresses because you're using strictly the API gateway spec or whatever. Well, nothing's going to work, and you chose your own hell, and I don't care. So if you're following some like normal standards that the community just follows, then it should be compatible. And I think that the projects we're using, like Argo and Cert Manager and things, will have a lot of those built in. Otherwise, they wouldn't be as popular. So there is a mix. I also don't think that it would necessarily work out of the box on even another cloud, let alone on bare metal. But it's really close to being able to. So if you install the right controllers and it talks to your Juniper network firewall or whatever to automate routing or something, I don't know, then fine. As long as the apps don't have to care about what that is, and they just use the normal APIs like an ingress object or annotations or whatever the case may be, great. That's where the guarantee is in that API contract. So like that's why I'm into Kubernetes, is because it's really like just finding the behavior you want and then letting other people on the other side of that API contract, whether that be Kubernetes or platform team or whatever, handle their side of the API contract however you want. I just need a URL/API to go to this pod.
Which works really, really well as long as the API contracts are relatively rigid.
Yeah.
Ingress is pretty bad, because Ingress, like,
Yeah.
you can't drop an Ingress that works on Amazon and Azure won't work on GCP, because you need like an asterisk, like it just straight up won't, like that, but okay.
Yeah, so we have different annotations. We've done that in multiple clouds, and we just need different annotations, and that's fine. We just have, well, we've had blocks in the past of templating like the GCP deployment or AWS deployment, and just go the right path, you know.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or you can have it per environment. We've done that too. So it's not even like GCP aware in the configuration. It's just like the dev version is in GCP. And so it gets this configuration, but it doesn't know that. But the prod is in AWS. That was a weird company, but it happens. So that's the approach. I think that will actually, I've never done this on bare metal at all, but I think that will work on bare metal if you have the other side of the network controlling setup, which is hard. But you chose to run it on bare metal at a certain point. Maybe you just need traffic or something, I don't know. Any other questions? I could talk about automation about all this stuff all day long, so we don't need to continue, but I'm also happy to dive into problems, philosophies, whatever.
Do you do anything with like network policies, or is that just something that goes on top of your platform once it exists? Or do you have any modules?
I would think that you would add it at the platform layer, the specific where we're installing Loki and all the things, because I think that's where you would want that. But we haven't done it yet, obviously. The only time we've actually done anything with like open policy agent was one company that was just not ready. They didn't have the sophistication. The developers were not ready for understanding like what their policy should be. They were still debating like, what does this 405 mean? The database is down, right? No, you're looking at Chrome network tab. You got a 405 from your own service. You tell me what that means. Literally a weekly conversation at that company. And you can imagine how a non-starter, a policy agent of any kind, or using it would be at that point. But I'd like to get that in. We just haven't had a client that needs it. We will probably in the next year have a client that needs that sort of like strict network policies for their compliance stuff, like anything in healthcare kind of a thing. But we're not there yet. If it matters to you and like you have a solution, great. PR, we'll happily like talk to it and see if it like works and test it and whatever.
Oh, that's such a great escape hack, isn't it? I really want this feature. PR is welcome.
Yeah, like we're not saving anybody work unless they want to do things our way.
Yeah.
In which case, we do it our way because we don't like to work. So everything that we do is really like when we added Cockroach, it was literally an hour's worth of like find the Helm chart, see how it matches all the patterns. Then we had it running in both non-prod and prod through CI/CD. Nobody logged into AWS at all. I haven't SSO'd into AWS in 3 weeks because I don't need to, because everything else is right there. It's either in Grafana, I can see what the health of everything is and explore things and write my own queries and dashboards. Or I don't need to because I'm just doing Git is the workflow. Git commit, Git push, create PR, all the things. That does require you also set up like your GitHub org requires you not have people that can commit to main. You may not. But we do use settings bot to do protected branches. So we protect main, and you really have to click the button and it's giant red and everybody knows. So auditors love us. Like we would pass an audit so fast because we would just be like, here's everything anybody in this org has ever done, ever, anywhere. Let's not get anything. So I think we're ready for that kind of compliance stuff. Just haven't had it come up yet. Do you? Yeah, that's usually where a lot of people are. And our clients are not like, they tend to need us because they're not ready for that sort of thing. We want to get developers moving and creating value very quickly and having some stability in their lives and have them have ownership over their services, things like that. So policy agent is really for like the security team to feel important. Which they should some places. I'm not disparaging, well, I will disparage most security teams shouldn't exist, but some places they really need them. Like, again, like if you're in healthcare or something, you probably need some checks and balances there. Yeah, it's available.